So, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to come back and to chat with everyone again and talk to you a little bit about name, image, and likeness in college athletics and kind of how much has changed and what exactly has changed over the course of the last year. Get a little bit about myself. I am not an academic. I'm actually an entrepreneur. I have been in the kind of technology, the online technology space for a long time. Upon the exit of one of my companies 3 years ago, when it was acquired, I had been doing work with the University of Nebraska's College of Business as an advisor and was asked if I would consider coming into a new role they were creating called the executive in residence. And the role was really brought in to kind of help the college understand how it could broaden its kind of programming and reach around entrepreneurship, both on campus and through the state. And interestingly, I in my early days of understanding the resources available within the college and how they might be activated in different ways, something dawned on me that actually happened one day as I was sitting in my office at the College of Business. I happened to have a great view of Memorial Stadium in the University of Nebraska. And being an alum from the school, I actually was staring at the stadium thinking back about my time while I was a student. I was at the University of Nebraska in the early and mid 90s, which allowed me to be there at a time where Nebraska was doing quite well. Winning national championships and got to witness so much of that firsthand. But I got to know so many of the players on the football team and the volleyball team as well, and I've kept close to a lot of them since. And I've met so many other former college student athletes that, interestingly, I started to write a list down of all of the people that I knew well that were college athletes and are currently, in some kind of work profession today. And I got about 30 names deep in my list. And it dawned on me that almost everyone on the list that I'd written down was an entrepreneur. So it made me wonder about the connection between college athletes and entrepreneurship. And I started doing some digging and some research to learn that there is indeed a connection between the two. And interestingly, there are some factors that people believe drove it, but I started to also notice some commonalities between things that were obvious to me now that I had thought this through from this direction. And interestingly, what it really boiled down to for me were a couple of things. One is that college athletes, typically the attributes that they lean into put them in position to really put themselves in place to be at a Division I school playing in that arena. Those attributes translate incredibly well to entrepreneurship. So the same kind of attributes they lean into to get the best in their sport also tend to be similar attributes to those that entrepreneurs lean into. But what really boiled down to for me was that at the end of the day, the thing that the two populations had in common, athletes and entrepreneurs, that made them a little bit more unique and different than other populations, was that simply they both used failure as fuel. And I thought that was interesting. And it made me wonder if the athletic department had made the connection yet between so many of their athletes once their eligibility expired and moving on, had moved into similar roles and had taken on entrepreneurship as either a full-time job or they've gone into a job where they're leading to their entrepreneurial skill set. And as it turned out, they were aware of it, but they hadn't really made a connection. And what it made me wonder is if that we could build programming, if it could make an impact. If we know that there's this population of student athletes that has this proclivity that we've already recognized towards entrepreneurship, what would happen if we started to invest in that entrepreneurship and those attributes the minute they walk onto campus, instead of waiting till the minute they're about to walk off of campus, which is what typically happens? And could that make an impact and a difference? And I started knocking on doors in the athletic department to see who I could talk to, who might listen, and came across the head of all of the academic programming for the University of Nebraska's athletic department. And not only did he understand the connection, he thought it was a great idea and thought that if there was programming we could build, he'd love to pursue it, what that could look like. So I got to work and started to figure out what I could build for student athletes that might help them. It didn't take me long after starting my work that I realized at this time, it was about a year and a half before NIL was something that a student athlete could contribute, could be involved in. But we knew that it was coming. And I wondered if there was maybe a different way to approach this, to build a bigger, broader program that could basically help the student athletes in all these different facets of both what NIL opportunities might be available to them, how it might impact them, even with their other academic pursuits. And it made me think about what could be built. And so I set this up because I'm going to share with some of the stuff that we built today, because what we started to work on then was very, I guess, innovative at the time, because no one else was really thinking on these lines. The thinking in NIL was very basic in the early days and the day that it launched, which was schools starting to focus, and primarily athletic departments started to focus on really one narrative. We're going to have to hurry up and figure out how to help kids make money. And that's going to be really the whole kind of new charge in how athletics and recruiting and stuff is going to be driven. So I set out to do something a little bit more unique and different. So I'll walk you through what I've done there, but I kind of wanted to kind of give you a sense of what happened then. So a Supreme Court case actually with the NCAA against a student actually was slotted to be heard in early 2021. And it wasn't a case related to NIL, but it was related to student athlete rights. And the case called Alston versus the NCAA what was appealed by the NCAA all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the NCAA appealed it under the hope that the courts would side with them so that they would in fact be able to maintain the capacity to restrict student athletes in what they could and could not participate in related to professional activities. In this case, education was about education rights that really spawned it. But what happened did not do the NCAA any favors. In fact, it was a 9-0 ruling against the NCAA. And if anyone understands the kind of politically charged times we're living in today, to see the court rule 9-0 on anything gives you a pretty good sense that everyone is pretty well aware of whether they think it's right or wrong. But really what they told the NCAA was basically, if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck and it smells like a duck, it's probably a duck. And what they said that the ruling felt like was the presence of antitrust regulations being put on one group of students amongst an entire population of students. So basically, the student population could participate and had access to all these educational components that the student athletes were restricted to because it would violate current NCAA restrictions. So that blew the doors wide open. And the NCAA then took all of the regulations that they had been working on with various institutions, conferences, and groups, and threw it out the door. So when NIL launched, they came out with 5 very broad guidelines. And these guidelines were broad intentionally, and they did not give much direction so that the NCAA could not be accused in any way, shape, or form of trying to suggest that they were suppressing a student athlete's right to earn money. What this did, though, was create an environment very similar to the Wild Wild West. And in fact, the regulations were so broad that schools were coming up with their own interpretations, ideas of them, and literally launched, in many cases, going out doing pretty much whatever they want. It didn't take long for the NCAA to come in and suggest that things were maybe a little bit out of control and put some guidance in place that helped better define what the student athletes could and could not do, and what the universities and institutions could and could not do in this case. and basically the one rule that was the most obvious and simplest of all, which was there was no capacity for NIL to be used in a pay to play type of environment. So in essence, you could not basically raise funds from donors to basically entice a student athlete through means of recruiting to come to the school by making a promise of a amount of money, and then you couldn't basically pay them to just play the sport. So they were basically requiring a certain level of compliance be done to show that a business or a person offered an opportunity, and then here's what the rate for that opportunity, that work is, and then then demonstrating the completed work. So that's kind of where it was left up to. That being said, with the NCAA being rather toothless, there are a lot of schools and institutions that decided to test the limits, continue to test the limits, and wait to see if the NCAA is going to actually enforce or has any capacity to enforce any of the rules they set out. So that's kind of the landscape as to where things started. So in the very early days when it launched, in I'd say the first 8 months, I like to call that the junior high dance phase. It was a thing that athletes could participate in. It was a thing that certain brands and companies were interested in seeing how they could utilize athletes. But like a junior high dance, the student athletes were on one side of the gym and the companies and sponsors were on the other side, and no one really knew how to approach each other. So the activity, it kind of came out with a whimper, and it was something that most schools and pundits started to sit and think, oh, well, this NIL isn't that big of a deal at all. This is pretty easy and orderly. It didn't take that long until people started to figure out how this worked, until enough money was getting raised at certain schools. And many of you probably have seen and even read some of the headlines of things that have occurred or have allegedly occurred. But the net of it was more and more activity was coming along. And we've now kind of phased into what I like to call the gold rush phase, which basically is very early days, very similar to the gold rush, where most of the athletes, as they are entering NIL, are finding gold laying all over the ground, and they just bend over and pick it up. In essence, there are a lot of deals being thrown their way. They don't think too much about what the deal is. It's just someone willing to give them money. They accept the deal, and in many cases, they fulfill the requirements, but not all. It is one of the issues with NIL right now. And people are throwing money at these student athletes as a new potential way to market or advertise their business or service, but they've yet to be able to measure what kind of ROI it brings. Does this actually really help me get more visibility? Is this student athlete really bringing some kind of a benefit to me and my business? So right now, it's an exercise for most student athletes that want to be involved in it, especially in those very visible revenue-producing sports, that this is pretty easy. I don't have to do much. There's plenty of money laying around, and I'll just keep picking up deals as they come at me. Well, now we're kind of entering into what is the next phase of this, is where we're starting to see a tightening of the actual money available and to whom it's available for. And we're starting to see these student athletes, they haven't quite recognized it yet, but what's happening are some of these brands and companies are starting to realize, well, I gave $50,000 to these 3 football players in the hopes of getting more exposure, and they barely lived up to their fulfillment, and or the exposure that I was hoping to get through their social media channels and stuff didn't pan out. So I don't think I'm going to do this again, or if I do it again, I'm going to do it in a very different way and probably for a lot less money. So this is where I think we're starting to see this change, and where the programming really is going to have to begin to shift for those universities that are really serious about trying to make NIL a component that will really help bring more athletes into their universities. And so I'll share with you the presentation that I have used here, and we kind of walk the new student athletes through as they come onto campus, so you can see some of the things that are available today. I'll go through it relatively quickly. You guys can ask questions if you have them along the way, but if not, I'll make sure that there's time at the end. But I wanted to just give you a sense and a capacity to see the breadth of stuff that is now starting to occur in some universities. 1 second here.
Looks good.
Can you guys see it?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the program that I built and designed is called Husker Accelerate. So this is a program that we now institute that's available to every student athlete on campus. There is a mandatory kind of a kickoff process that they go through when they come onto campus, whether they're a freshman or a transfer coming into the university in the system. So what is Accelerate? Basically, it's a program that's built to identify, strengthen, and activate the entrepreneur attributes of each individual student athlete or each person involved in the program. And why we're doing it, the net is pretty simple the way I'm calculating it. Instead of just investing in the next 4 years by helping them just find opportunities and money, my goal was to create a program that would help basically give the entrepreneurs tools that would allow them to build a business around themselves. So they could then understand how to earn money and how to better manage that process and grow the opportunities that they might have in front of them. Look, the net of it is that the data shows us that about, I think the last number was like 98.5% of collegiate athletes do not move on to play professionally. So the overwhelming majority of them do not. So what that means is that the capacity to earn is going to likely be in those years of eligibility, right? When their visibility is the highest, when they have the most exposure because of the position they're in. But it also means that they're going to likely move into the real world afterwards and not move on to play professional sports. So if that's the case, what tools can we give them, especially if we know they're going to move into some kind of likely entrepreneurial endeavor that would better position them? And the reason this is important is because the majority of college athletes are not business majors. And the reason varies from university from one to another. But the net of it, as I was explained to me, is that for most athletic departments in their academic centers, their job is to keep the student athlete eligible and help them graduate. The reality of it is that many of the courses in the business college in their days are challenging for many of these student athletes, and it likely will not allow them to move through the College of Business. And keeping in mind that, especially in our revenue producing sports, that a significant component of those sports, of the participants in those sports, come from underserved communities. So they're coming on to these campuses and coming into this mix already less prepared than their peers that are coming from better appropriated locations. So I built a program that basically really helped them get access to a set of tools here, and I'll walk through each one of these. So I started off the company Open Doors. Some of you may or not be familiar with it, but it's a company actually started in Lincoln, Nebraska by two ex-football players. That it's a marketplace that allows businesses to post opportunities for student athletes and for student athletes to create profiles so that they can get connected with opportunities. It's the largest, most widely used marketplace for student athletes and businesses to find each other today. But it really has limitations. They offer education around mostly social media because that's usually the tool that most student athletes use to help earn money, to use their social media presence to help project and sponsor or advertise for others. And they help them basically assess their social media accounts. They help them educate how to make those accounts better. And then they help them understand how to get more followers, basically, so that there's more value. But that's not where it ends. So my thinking was on the other side of this is that we would create this program based on these attributes. So the first of these is to identify what those attributes are, right? And I'll walk you through how we do that. But you can see here, there's some tool sets that we use. The next is then to strengthen those attributes once the student athlete understands what they are. And then lastly, it's how do you activate them? How do you put what we've taught you into action so that you can actually help make money with it? And the identify side, we use tools like the Clifton Strengths Finder and the Builder Profile 10, which is Gallup's entrepreneurial assessment tool. On the strengthen side of that, we tap into coaching networks that we have that exist on campus for both Clifton Strengths and BP10. We have a mentorship network that we have brought together of former athletes as well as prominent business leaders and other entrepreneurs in the area. Inside the athletic department, they already have a program called Life Skills that already does a multitude of different things. And then we've created actual curriculum and 4-credit classes that are available for those student athletes. And I'll walk you through the examples of some of those. And then lastly, it's how do we help them activate it? How do we actually help them get involved? Well, one of the things that we realized, and one of the questions that I had of Blake Lawrence, the founder of Open Doors, when I asked him, Open Doors' tool was already used by professional athletes before it was allowed to be used by college athletes. And I asked him, why are some athletes able to take your platform and make a ton of money and some struggle? And really it came down to something pretty simple. The ones that are doing really well have a team around them, people that are helping them. They have a social media manager, they have a publicist, they have a communications expert, someone that's helping craft all the things they're doing, them then utilize their social media channels to basically earn more money. Well, this is a disadvantage for the college athlete. They don't have access to that, and the rules, the way that they were specifically launched by the NCAA, built a wall between the athletic department and the student athlete when it came to NIL resources. So the athletic department was not in a position they were allowed to help. So the idea that I came up with was to actually work with the group of students within the College of Business and create a team of what we call NIL advisors. So the same way that a student on campus who is struggling in a course might go to another student for tutoring, they can do the same thing here for NIL. So any student athlete that's struggling can hook up with one of the students that already we've determined on our team has an entrepreneurial background or has they're studying a discipline that we know could be beneficial to that student athlete, and is then versed in all components of NIL that can then work either one-on-one with that athlete or with the groups of athletes. And then we went to the different colleges on campus, and we worked with the College of Law. And through the entrepreneurship clinic there, we have the capacity to help any student athlete do any trademark work, create an LLC, get guidance on contracts, things of that nature. The College of Journalism, we were fortunate enough to have an actual full student-run agency inside of it, where we can do logo design, logo work, we can do graphic design work, we can do different types of posters and advertising they might need for camps or things that they decide to do. And then in the College of Business, we had a group of students in various programs, and we're working with the College of Engineering too, to bring on things like being able to create certain web and or tech tools for those student athletes. And then beyond that, we're creating an actual accelerator program. So should any of these student athletes emerge on the other side of this with the business that they started while they were there, want to continue to build it, we have an accelerator program that they can go through with that business once they've their eligibility is expired and they're not focusing solely on the business. So, as I mentioned before, the tools that we use on the Identify side, Clifton Strengths and the BP10, I don't know how many are familiar with them or not, but the tools are great, but they're also only as good as the coaching that you can bring along with them to help people understand what their strengths are and what their talents are in the BP10. So we've been able to leverage these tools. Every student athlete now, when they come onto campus, along with every business student who's already done this, takes the Clifton Strengths assessment and has access to the BP10. And then can then tap into our coaching network of other trained students and faculty that can sit down with them and then help them continue to explore exactly how they can lean into those strengths. In fact, in the College of Business, every incoming student not only takes the Clifton Strengths test, but actually takes a mandatory 1-credit course every year that helps them start by learning their strengths and then advances to in the 4th year, how to basically leverage those strengths to start their career, whether it's applying for a job or preparing for job interviews or whatever it may be. On the strength side, coaching, like I mentioned, is a big component of this. Really getting those student athletes access to those people that can help them along the way when it comes to the Strengths Finder and BP10. The mentorship, again, having actual people and athletes that they can relate to. Someone that played a sport there before and has moved on and done well professionally. Whether it was they played in their professional sport and made a bunch of money, or they went and had a great career, or both. They tend to relate incredibly well and tend to be very attentive to that particular group. And then the life skills programming, again, that's an entire series of programs that's already built and mandatory for student athletes. we've built in more tools around entrepreneurship in there. And then we've been doing a lot of workshops and speakers around certain topics and elements. Maybe most specifically, and something I'll talk about in a little more depth after we go through the presentation, is around financial literacy. And I mentioned to you last time these pop-up classes. So these are actual 1-credit classes that we set up. They're 8 weeks long, so it's half a semester for the student athlete. They can be graded or pass, no pass. The great part about a pop-up class, the way they're defined, at least by the university, is it's a class that only requires 15 contact hours. It has a lot of flexibility in terms of the way you set the schedule. And you have to basically be able to build the curriculum and have the stated outcome for the class reviewed. It doesn't have to go through the full curriculum process in order to be brought to life. So we can bring a pop-up class on a topic up very quickly. And what we've done is we've created pop-up classes that are typically either built by or taught by experts in the business community on these topics. So in this first semester when we launched it, these were the classes that were available. So one of them was this investing in strengths class, which I mentioned to you, every incoming freshman business student already was taking. We built a version for non-business students and had a little bit more focus on entrepreneurship. Another one, again, a component of a larger class on entrepreneurship and business plans and pitching. We took a component of that out and built the class solely around how to pitch yourself and your ideas. This class I love, we partner with the College of Journalism to basically teach them how to basically learn how to tell stories using Instagram. So how do you use Instagram actually most effectively to tell a story and to continue building kind of a brand in and around yourself. So that kind of gives you an idea. And then this one I love because it's not needed to it, but it's about basically European sports and the media. And why I thought it was interesting was on a couple different levels. One is that it's just a broader sense of the interaction between two groups and taking it into another sport that not all of the U.S. college students are familiar with. But two, Nebraska has the benefit of having to have a great women's volleyball team. And many of them go on to play professionally when they leave in the European market. So this was a great class we thought that we could also bring online because it would give them an idea of kind of how things worked over there in that aspect. I mentioned the NL advisors, like I said, these were high achieving graduate students and upperclassmen from the College of Business, Journalism, and Law. They work one-on-one or in groups. It's a great peer-to-peer connection. Interestingly, if we get a coach or someone to try it, well, a coach doesn't count because they'll listen to their coaches pretty much all the way through. But if we get a staff member that tries to reach out to a student athlete to get them to remind them that they have to fulfill something in order to get the compliance done to close up their NIL opportunity, they're not very responsive. But when we get a fellow student to connect with them, to talk to them about getting them help to get it done, they almost always respond. And they also speak each other's language. They're communicating back and forth via text message. Their peers, they see each other. They're often in classes together, and we see a much stronger rate of the athlete basically following up when they're connected with the NIL advisor. So beyond that, I think I mentioned some of these earlier, but we have a ton of campus resources that we brought online that we made sure that they're aware of. We have an actual student-led, or let's say venture capital fund that is available to any startup. Our Center for Entrepreneurship has programming in it. Our law school has an entrepreneurship clinic. And then we happen to have the Clifton Strengths Institute that was created from a gift from Gallup that really focuses on StrengthsFinder and BP10. And then another one that I love actually is our Center for Sales Excellence, which is basically teaching them how to sell. The one thing I know as a entrepreneur and founder, and the thing that I preach to any fledgling entrepreneur or early founder that I met with, is that I remind them that I don't care what role anyone in your new company is in, for the first handful of years, all you'll be doing is selling. And the more you can learn and get comfortable about selling and selling yourself and your ideas, the better you're going to be at accomplishing what you want to do. So this is something that we're really excited that we were able to bring on board for them. So in a nutshell, that's basically kind of what I wanted to walk through quickly, what we have in place and give you guys an understanding of it. So I just want to stop there first and to see if you guys had any specific questions about NIL or any of this thing any of the stuff that we've put together, because I'd be happy to answer that before I talked about a few other things.
Just feel free. I have a few, but let's see who has any questions. Feel free to either unmute or take your camera off, put them in the chat. Some really interesting information about what they're doing in Nebraska there.
So there is one class I see in the chat, a couple of them. So the classes, for instance, though, I just mentioned, what's interesting about the classes is this, and this was done very intentionally. Each of the classes are on some attribute of entrepreneurship or some component that we know an entrepreneur either needs or will strongly benefit from using. We launched this under the NIL kind of hashtag, so to speak, or the Nebraska hashtag, as they call it on campus, to help basically bring more exposure to it. But the reality of it is the classes are open to all students on campus. So one of the things that where NIL has benefited the entire student population is that it allowed me and others to use the fact that NIL has come on scene to very quickly spin up a whole bunch of new programming and curriculum around entrepreneurship that we now have available to any student on campus. So when we were building these programs, I don't think necessarily just about the student athlete. I also think about, the music major who maybe wants to be a songwriter and they don't realize that, boy, I'm gonna have to build a brand around myself too. In fact, we created these classes with the hope and the design that they would be 50% athletes and 50% students. And the intent was to actually create an environment where we would have more potential collisions between groups or individuals that would not normally happen. Because oftentimes you may have a great idea to build something, but you have no idea how to build it. And what it takes is you finding someone else that does know how to build it, but has no vision to understand what to build. And those co-founding teams and those relationships are often what make great things happen. So we like to create these environments where these collisions occur. So those classes, first of all, are available to all students. And in fact, the way it's worked out without us having to manipulate in any way is the classes are filling up about 50-50 every semester. So that's a little on the class, but one of the questions asked were what percentage of athletes will make money leveraging name, image, and likeness? That's a great question. And that's going to be very dependent upon the university. If you take it just by what the market on its own you'd probably see a very small single-digit number of student athletes really being in a position to take full advantage of it. And that's mostly because of the relationship or the requirement of the amount of exposure required in order for someone to get excited about sponsoring or bringing a student athlete into the fold. What often happens now, and what has occurred on most campuses, is the creation of what they call collectives. And these collectives are an organized, basically, group of boosters and companies brought together to raise money to then be put in a position to be able to be taken to an individual athlete or entire sport. Football, women's basketball, soccer, and then build a program to use NIL money, to put NIL money into play. So those collectives are driving a significant amount of the actual activity happening inside of it. And it wouldn't surprise you that these collectives don't happen to kind of know what the coaches might want or hope and need. And then they start to basically work to create a program to fill that. Now, that being said, there are some of the universities that are trying to do more. In fact, I'm really proud of the fact that the University of Nebraska is one of those universities. In fact, the goal for the University of Nebraska is to not only, because of Title IX compliance, make sure that it's available to all sports and all sexes, but they want a program that delivers some level of impact to every sport, regardless of how much revenue it generates and how much visibility it has. So the hope is to be able to ensure that every single athlete on campus gets something, right? And it's something that's meaningful, right? There's another component of NIL that also comes online that's a little harder to measure, but has a higher degree of impact. But it's around in-kind deals. In fact, I worked with one of the largest ophthalmologists in the state last year to create a program where he offered free corrective eye surgery to any student athlete on campus. And he's doing it not necessarily as much as a tool to help broaden the visibility of his company. It was around the information and data that he had around its impact on the performance in sports. In fact, there's some one of the most maybe visible and vocal people about how it completely changed their performance was Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods, when he literally came into the peak of his performance, all that occurred after he got corrective eye surgery. He could read the greens better, and his putting increased dramatically, and it kicked him off on where that point in time where no one could touch him. But there's so many other athletes like that. So those kinds of deals are broad across all. In fact, I talked to the doctor earlier today that wants to renew it for the next year. And he told me one of the most impactful stories was the captain of the women's rifle team got corrective eye surgery and it improved her performance dramatically. So stuff like that is pretty cool how it can reach. But I tell you what, the one thing that I really love and the thing that I preach in the time that I spend talking to student athletes, the people's attention I really try to get are the female athletes. And I do that for a couple of reasons, because right now percentually male sports gobble up the majority of the dollars that are being distributed today. A lot of that has to do with the visibility, but it also has to do with the roster size of the football teams and the amount of support put behind football, which is typically the largest revenue driving sport at each school. But what's interesting though, when you break it down on the kind of opportunities being presented between men and women, the female athletes are actually getting more per deal than the male and more opportunities than the male athletes. And there's a couple of reasons that I think are behind it. Two, I think that are pretty obvious, and there's a bunch of others that others discussed. The first being that for most female athletes, they already are very active on their social media and usually in a way related to the sport. Mostly because they are in less visible sports and they have already spent a long time promoting themselves and their sports. And social media has been a tool that they've embraced and are typically much more active on than their male counterparts. So they already have better platforms. So that's one thing that's in their advantage. The other advantage they have is, I think, related to as people are dipping their toe in the water and brands and companies are realizing that they're attaching their company and their brand to an 18 to 20-some-year-old, that there's still risk in the fact that they don't always make the best decisions. And typically, if you wake up on a Sunday and read in the newspaper about something stupid that an athlete did the night before and got in trouble, it's typically not a female athlete. So those two things alone have driven brands to those female athletes. So those female athletes are in a position right now where they could take advantage of this in a way that that their male counterparts have yet to either figure out or may haven't been fully understood. So I really try to preach. I spent a lot of time with our women's volleyball team and making sure that they understood that they're some of the most visible athletes now in the entire state, not only because of they're already more active, but they're also playing at a championship level, and they're in a position where they can leverage their brand in a way that their male counterparts can't. And it's been great to see that play out. So again, that's the question to the percentage of it. I think what you'll see is that at some point in time, every single athlete at each school will get paid something. It will vary, though, likely related to the revenue the sport drives or the visibility it has or the support the school has.
Joe, that's awesome. I can tell that this is something that you just are really passionate about. There's a couple other questions that related to the program. One, and I'll just ask you two, and then you can talk to them. One is, have other universities contacted you, Nebraska, to model what you're doing or to learn about your program? And then another question about, and you may not have enough information yet about this because it's still relatively new. Do you have any data or information to show if students are choosing Nebraska because of the support they're receiving related to NIL?
So the answer to both of those questions is yes. Definitely, I've had other universities reach out to talk about the program and the things we're doing. And we do our best to try to provide as much help as we can to anyone that's interested. It's just kind of the way that we've always approached things. And the other thing too about college athletics is that while it's incredibly competitive, there is a strong component of camaraderie that goes on in those sports. Coaches, for instance, in the off season, spend time visiting other schools to learn what another school is doing, or they saw it do really well. Nebraska, especially when they were doing so well in the early 90s, had coaches and team in administrators from other schools always showing up on campus to learn. So that's the great part. It's a very collegial environment. On the recruiting side, yes. Now while no promises are ever made to any athlete about what money can be raised or what money they can make, we are in a position to be able to lay down all the things that are available to them, and this program is a big part of that. And what we've already seen is that the student athletes, what's interesting, coming out of high school, are now already so much better performed and prepared to think about NIL that they already come in with it as a major component. And if you think about this, one of the biggest things that used to draw or attract student athletes to school often had to do with the facilities that they had available, the physical facilities. Well, the reality of it is today is NIL is what's driving the new facilities war. It's not about physical spaces anymore. It's about the capacity and programming available around what they can earn and what NIL can do for them and the resources that are attached to it. So,
is there a cap to what athletes can earn?
Currently, no, there's nothing. And I don't know if you'll ever see one. I don't think the NCAA would be in a position to put a cap on without violating some kind of antitrust component. Universities, something where, matter of fact, where this is likely headed is this stuff will ultimately become internalized and a component of the athletic departments. The way that they'll be able to finally put some guardrails on NIL and some constraints around it that won't be challenged in that way are going to be if the schools and universities are in position to do it themselves. So if you follow college football in particular, you'll notice that there has been a big race over the last couple of years to expand the amount of teams in some of the big Power 5 conferences, where you have the SEC and the Big Ten probably driving this more than anyone. What is happening is these conferences are aligning to, in essence, be prepared to take over what the NCAA no longer is in position to do. And you'll see the rules and regulations start to come on a conference level, where the Power 5 conferences will likely come up with a set of kind of best practices, and then the conferences will institute them for institutions to follow.
Thank you. Other questions? I know there was one more in the chat. Is this only what you guys are doing? Is it only, you may answer this, and I'm sorry, is it only at Nebraska? What other universities are doing similar programs for athletes?
I don't know. I can't speak yet to the depth of other schools, because when we first came out with this program, we were definitely the only one doing it. Now that it's been about a year and people sort of realize they have to kind of put more meat on the bone, so to speak, so that we're seeing more and more like this. A lot of people are just lining up resources though and say, yeah, we have a whole bunch of resources for you, but they're really just pointing in the direction of something that already existed. We're trying to literally build something which is a little bit different. My hope is that more universities will do this. And the one area that I didn't touch on yet, but I think is important and is going to be a huge component of this moving forward, is around financial literacy.
Yeah.
The data from the NFL is alarming. So the NFL, in a study a few years back, came back and basically with some data that was shocking. First of all, the average age of a student athlete that enters the NFL is 22 years old. The average career of an NFL athlete is a little over 3 years, 3.2 years. So before someone's 30 years old, right, their career is already come and gone, and they've had access to a lot of money in most cases. Within 3 years, of their career finishing, so still before they're the age 30, 80% of those athletes are broke, divorced, or in bankruptcy. 80%. So now, if we take this relative amount of money and start giving it to them instead of at 22, we start giving it to them at 18, how are we to believe that they're going to be any better prepared? And in fact, one of the largest contributing factors to why they go broke is around financial literacy, but the other largest is around people that are taking advantage of them, family members and others that have access or capacity to start to do that. So what happens now at 18, when in many cases they're still under the care of a parent or guardian, those people are in even a more prime position to take advantage of their son, daughter, or guardian. So there's some really, really scary stuff that I think could evolve in this if universities don't start getting more and more involved in the education side of it, on the financial literacy side.
Wow. Jay LeBlanc, you can unmute and ask, or I can just ask for you. I don't know if everybody's what they're doing in their environment. So Jay asked, does Nebraska do similar programs on your other campuses or just at the Lincoln campus?
Everything is pretty much done in this regard on a campus by campus basis. But at any time that any campus is interested in ever learning about anything or wanting to connect or share, it's wide open to do. So there's no depth yet in the other campuses quite yet. But that's also their need and demand and drive is not as great as what happens, when you have especially a football team in a Power 5 conference.
And another question is, do you believe federal guidelines could remove barriers between athletic departments and collectives? And if so, will that change how collectives spend money on recruits and players? From Drew Williams.
Yeah, so the answer I think is yes. The problem is they've already come to the table a half a dozen times to try to create something and ended each discussion with typically one party walking away. So again, in the political environment we currently have, it's really hard to get both sides to agree on an approach. One side wants to focus on just NIL and focusing on rules for it. The other side wants to focus on the broader total student and student athlete rights, and they can't seem to find that middle ground. So no one's holding their breath, believing that the federal government's going to step in anytime soon and make those changes. But yes, it would be a great place for them to exist and live if they were to be in position to make such changes.
We have enough time for about 2 more questions, or anything else, Joe, that you wanted to make sure you touched base on. See if there's anything else in the chat. So I don't see anything in the chat. Is there anything that you want to talk about your future plans, the direction for where this, and NIL was only July of 2021, so it's really not even been full 2 years. I'm curious. I mean, you guys must have some idea of what we see in the future of this.
Well, my focus honestly is really shifting towards financial literacy. This is from real conversations I've had with student athletes that I'll often ask them when I first meet with them, when they're looking for advice or help. I'll ask them, so tell me a little bit about what you think your estimated 1099 income looks like for the year. And they go, what's 1099 income? Okay, well, that's income without withholding. And they go, well, what's withholding? Okay, well, that's the money that you have to set aside for the government. Well, why does the government get money? Then it's like, okay, well, what are you doing? How are you recording any expenses or things that you're incurring throughout your work? Why would I do that? Well, one is that you can use them to deduct some of your potential taxable income. But it's, if you're going to build a business around it, you can start tracking these things. They'll start to ask questions, how much money are you setting aside for savings, right? So this is a great story that I'll finish with this one. This is a similar conversation, same story. the student athletes just don't know these things. And it's not because they're not smart. It's because they're 18 and 19 and 20. And when I think about it, I didn't know most of these things because most of us didn't. We didn't do it. We didn't know these things until we were forced to later on. But I actually started talking to two of the student athletes in the same meeting. And I said, look, guys, think about this. I go, if each of you today, you have one of the most powerful tools at your disposal today. It's compound interest. I said, if each today saves $1,000 a month for the next 10 years, and then you stopped, then by the time you retire, that's going to be over $2 million. I said, over $1,000 over 10 months. I said, if you wait 10 years to start that, which it said, then that's only worth about $700,000. And if you wait another 10 years, which is unfortunately what many do in the country, it's only worth about $400,000. But the reality of it is you have compound interest on your side. And they were like, what's this wizardry you speak of? And the reality of it is they just don't understand these things. And I gave it to them add a little more context to it. I go, think about this, guys. You're typically on campus as a student athlete for 5 years. And most of you have opportunity to start making money with NIL the second you walk onto campus. If you think $1,000 that from the minute you walk on campus, by the time you walk off, you've got 5 years of that 10 years already covered. And I go, that's just at $1,000. I go, most of you will make more money to do more than that. I said, so think about what this tool can do for you, even if it doesn't put fancy new sneakers on your feet or allow you to drive a new car. It can be incredibly impactful for you and your family. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is around the corner that I want to focus on. I hope gets more attention.
I am sure that this group absolutely agrees. I know that we're coming to a close. I have a question about what can we do for them in high school to help prepare athletes. I don't know if that's a quick answer. We have a lot of conversation about that here in Arizona with some of our programming. Is there a quick answer to should it start before they get to the university?
100%. Programming, whether it's through athletic departments or the schools themselves around these topics should be required for student athletes. NIL is currently legal, and I believe about half of the states now for high school athletes. It's probably a matter of time, probably before they're all there because of the competitive disadvantage it would put certain states at. So it's happening in the high school ranks already. And yesterday I read that the youngest kid to sign an NIL agreement happened this week. It was a 6-year-old kid who signed I think a golfing deal. Yes. Yeah, with a brand, right? So again, now that won't impact his potential, collegiate career. That kind of stuff can happen, and high school students are already engaging in it. So yes, the answer is more needs to be done, and it needs to be around this kind of programming.
Thank you so much, Joe. We have recorded this today, folks. I know that